everybody. This is chapter 5 and we're going to talk about revising your writing. So remember we talked from chapter 4 about the writing process and the specific steps that you want to take when you're starting the writing process. You don't want to go right into putting your words on paper and going from there. There's the planning process and the organization, the drafting, the revising and proofreading. So now that you've gotten that far, we're going to talk more about revising your writing. And again, this is not English 101, so we're going to kind of go through some things, cover some basic guidelines that are probably going to be familiar to you already, but things that I think you'll find successful that the book touches on so that you'll be effective in your business writing. These are concepts that you want to remember because we will have 2 writing assignments throughout the semester. So you have your neutral message and your bad news message, which we will cover at a later date. So let's get started with the outcomes of the course, or of the chapter, excuse me. We're going to talk about words. So you want to make sure that you choose the right words for your writing. We're going to talk about sentences and making sure that your sentences are the most effective that they can be. Paragraphs, making sure that you're developing logical paragraphs in your writing. And then finally, the tone of your message and just making sure that it's appropriate for the business setting. So that's slide 2. Moving on to slide 3, the principles of style. So when you think about it overall, how is an idea expressed? I mean, we have ideas all day long. We have 1,000 ideas an hour. But how do you actually express an idea? It's using your words, right? And making sure that you have appropriate words and creative words to convey your idea to other people so that they kind of get an idea of what it is that your idea is. So making sure that your words are clear and concise. And we'll talk about more of these in later detail, but this is just your general overview. Sentences, using a variety of sentence types. You don't want to use constant simple sentences. You also don't want to use a bunch of run-on sentences. So you have to remember, overall, you have to keep your reader in mind. So what are they going to be able to comprehend and understand so that they can take away the key messages from your writing? Paragraphs, make sure that they're unified and coherent. And then looking at making sure your tone is written confidently as well. So moving on to slide number 4. Again, we've talked about making sure that your word choice is clear and concise. So we're going to talk now about the words that you use. When we say that you want clear words, looking at slide 5 now, you want to make sure that your words are accurate and complete. So if your message has anything inaccurate in it, then your credibility is shot as the writer. You know, you want to make sure that your audience believes in you and believes what you're saying and finds you credible in talking about what it is you're talking about. You want to have familiar words. So you want to talk about words that or use words that the audience would understand so that your message is carried away. Remember, we talked about this from night 1 in class, that you don't want to have words that, you know, your audience is unfamiliar with. You know, you don't want to say omnipresent when you can just simply say everywhere. You don't want to say pontificate when you can say discuss. So ideas like that, so your reader isn't confused. Specific and concrete language. You know, you don't want to be ambiguous in your terminology. Concrete, you want to make sure that you can use words that are going to bring an actual image to mind for the reader or for the audience when they're hearing this message. And then avoid dangling expressions. Those are those expressions I like to call the WTF expressions because they're just sort of there. You know, they don't really bring anything to the writing. They're just kind of hanging there, hence them being called dangling expressions. And then lastly, again, we've talked about this, making sure that jargon, slang, and just cliche terms are used at a minimum so that your audience is able to follow along. The thing I like most about this chapter is that it uses a lot of examples for writing. So, and the way that we've broken down the examples are, instead of saying this, you can say this. So if you look at slide 6, talking about simple words, right? Instead of saying the impending study will ascertain the feasibility of our obtaining conciliation, what would be an easier way to say it? You know, in the impending study, so the upcoming study, you can just simply say the study will determine if we can agree. I mean, that's a lot more simpler, a lot more easier to understand than the first option. The second, instead of saying deciding on an internship with a particular conglomerate may be of immense consequence to your potential livelihood. Choosing an internship will affect your life. That's simple as that. The next slide, again, simple words. Instead of saying modification, try just saying change. It makes you sound better if you use big words, but you have to always remember your audience and keep them in mind at the forefront. Your audience is ultimately the person that's going to be reading this. You want to make sure that you use words that they can understand. Instead of saying, let's endeavor to do this, let's try to do this. Substantial could be large. Enumerate, list. Termination, you could just simply say, instead of we're going to terminate this project, we're going to end the project. Initiate, start, and then utilization, use. So thing to keep in mind is simpler words are more likely to be understood. Now, when we talk about that specific and concrete language, remember, specific, unambiguous, concrete is a definite picture that comes to mind. So instead of saying the report is very sloppy, you could just say, I marked more than 20 errors in the report. So that's a lot better way of saying the report is sloppy. You're still conveying that, and that idea is still getting across, but you're a lot more specific in it by saying, I made 2 errors, or I caught 2 errors. You're saying, I caught more than 20. So that would tell you that, yeah, you probably maybe didn't pay as much attention to this or as much attention to the proofreading as you probably should have. Instead of saying, you never finish your work on time, try saying, this is the 3rd deadline you've missed this month. Next slide. So how to avoid dangling expressions. So again, the WTF sentence, or the WTF part of the sentence. Any part of a sentence that doesn't logically fit with the rest of the sentence. And we're going to look at examples, and they're really funny when you see them because you've heard sentences like this before, and it's going to all of a sudden come to mind. So how to avoid them. Make the subject of the sentence the doer of the action expressed in the introductory clause. So the subject is the person doing the action. And we'll look at examples, and this will make a lot more sense. Maybe move the expression closer to the word that it modifies. Make sure that the specific word to which a pronoun reference is clear. And then if it's still after that, just revise the sentence and make sure that it is coherent. So when you see a dangling expression, it makes it hard to understand how it relates to the rest of the sentence. So let's look at some examples. I'm on slide 10 now. Fun with dangling expressions. Abraham Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address while traveling to Gettysburg on the back of an envelope. So the way that the sentence is written makes it sound like he traveled to the Gettysburg Address, or traveled to Gettysburg on the back of an envelope. But no, he wrote the Gettysburg Address on the back of the envelope while traveling to Gettysburg. Is a simple way to write that. I'd been driving for about 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. So have you been driving for 40 years total? Or have you literally been behind the wheel for 40 years when you finally decided to fall asleep and then you had the accident? 2 cars were reported stolen by the Groveton police yesterday. So did the Groveton police steal the cars, or did the Groveton police report the stolen cars? Last one, Dr. Ruth to talk about sex with newspaper editors. So maybe she is going to talk to newspaper editors about sex. Looking at modifiers. How can you fix the modifiers? After an hour of sitting, the chairs become uncomfortable. Chairs can't really become uncomfortable. Chairs don't really have a feeling, right? So you would say after sitting on the chairs for a few hours, people become uncomfortable. That conveys it a little bit better. Next example. Distracted by the music, a rabbit ran in front of the car and I hit it. So the rabbit was distracted by music and that's why you hit it? Or you were distracted by music and hit a rabbit that ran in front of your car. So again, you just see that slight distinction. You're using the exact same words. You're just putting them in a different part of the sentence so that they reflect back to the person or the thing that is actually doing the action. And then pronoun references. Looking at the next slide, slide 12. Bananas seem to have the highest turnover, but the staff is not able to keep up. Most of the time they run out. So they being bananas or they being staff. So again, instead of saying they run out, you can just simply say the bananas run out. Although the owners and partners have changed, they continue to expand. You mean the business continues to expand. The owners and the partners of the business change, but the business continues to expand. So just making sure that your pronouns are clear. Next slide, slide 13. What is more natural, original language? Would you ever say, it is with great enthusiasm that I am responding to your job advertisement? Or would you just say, I was very excited to see this job advertisement? What about enclosed? Please find the proposal for the schedule for the training session. It's a lot of words. You can just say, here's the proposed training schedule. Same idea conveyed, cutting down on the words. And then again, we've talked about this, just condensing the jargon and making sure that you don't use terms that are superfluous or just unknown to the audience. Win-win situation, synergies, low-hanging fruit, by COB tomorrow, paradigm shift, best practices, at the end of the day. You have an idea of what the end of the day is. Maybe your end of the day is 5:30. Mine is 4:30. Maybe mine's 9 p.m. tonight. But using those terms, if you throw that out there, your audience is going to get confused. Next, writing concisely. When you write concisely, it slows the pace of communication, right? So concise meaning short and compact. So making sure that you slow down the pace of communication. You use the fewest words possible to still achieve your objective. So avoid redundancy in wordy expressions and avoid hidden verbs and subjects. So we're going to look at some examples of this. How can you eliminate the redundancies? The end result will be that we are completely unanimous. I mean, do you have to say end result? Isn't the result at the end of something? So can't you just say, we'll be unanimous? Each and every one of us is exactly the same. What about just we're the same? The same idea is conveyed, but you're just using fewer words, making it more concise. Again, how can you eliminate wordiness? The tiles on the floor will reflect the lighting in the ceiling. The floor tiles will reflect the lighting. What about our benefits for employees are at the top of the list for companies in our competitive set? Our employees' benefits are better than our competitors. Again, same exact message, just fewer words used. And then how can you reveal the hidden verb? Instead of saying a reduction in the price is essential, why don't we just say we need to reduce the price? If something's essential, you need to do it, right? So why don't you just say we need to reduce the price? Instead of saying I have made a decision that the product faces elimination, why don't you just say I decided to eliminate the product? So when you look at what a hidden verb is, it's a verb that's changed into a noun. So by doing that, it weakens the action. Just keep that in mind. And then when you're talking about how to form sentences and how to, put the action versus the verb and how to write that, we're going to look at an example of the same sentence written 5 different ways by choosing a specific choice or making a specific choice for how you're going to write it. So if you're going to have a clunky expletive, your sentence will sound like this. To increase the number of candidates, it is recommended that Alta use an online recruiting system. If you're going to do I, we as a subject, you would say, to increase the number of candidates, I recommend that Alta use an online recruiting system. If you're going to have the phrase as a subject, using an online recruiting system will increase Alta's numbers of candidates. If you're going to have Alta as the subject, you would say, to increase the number of candidates, Alta should use an online recruiting system. And then candidates as a subject would say, more candidates will apply to Alta if we use an online recruiting system. So you're taking 2 phrases, right? Using an online recruiting system, Alta will have more candidates. But the way that you phrase it and how you put it in a certain order is going to reflect or highlight different things and make the emphasis stand out on either the noun or the verb or the phrase. So keeping that in mind. Again, not drilling into this too deeply. It's not English class, but it's just making sure that you're cognizant of writing these things in different ways for effective business writing. The next slide talks about, and this is slide 20, when you're in a Word document. And I'm sure you all know this, but if you didn't, when you're in a Word document, if you're making edits or if you are editing someone else's, you do have the option to track your changes, where you can actually make notations on edits. It's a very effective, helpful tool, and I highly recommend that you use it because there's a lot in there that will help you make your writing more professional and just more effective to convey the message you're trying to convey. So that's talking about word choice. Let's move on to sentences. And again, per all the other lectures, any questions about anything in the lecture, please send me an email. It's on the syllabus if there's anything that's confusing you. Sentences. You want your sentences to be effective. So you're going to use a variety of sentence types. There's complex, compound, simple sentences. We're going to look at all three. Making sure that you have active and passive voice appropriately used, and then also parallel structure. So when you talk about sentence types, remember a simple sentence is just one independent clause. If you have a compound sentence, it's two or more independent clauses, right? Simple, one, compound, two. If you have a complex, it's one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. So let's look at some examples of these in play. If I say the sentence, please remember to turn out the lights when you leave the room. That's going to be a complex sentence, right? Please remember to turn out the lights. That is a sentence in and of itself. When you leave the room is a dependent clause. It's not a complete sentence on its own. So it's got an independent and dependent clause, complex sentence. Warren started working here in April, and he has already finished his first major project. And just because the way my slides are, I don't see the answer. So if the sentences are a little bit off, forgive me. This is a compound sentence. Warren started working here in April. He has already finished his first major project. So two independent sentences or two independent clauses makes it a compound sentence. I don't know why he doesn't remember any of the new employees' names or where they work. That would be a simple sentence because there's only one independent clause there. And then last, after you left on Friday, we decided to move the deadline. Complex, right? After you left on Friday is the dependent clause. We decided to move the deadline, independent clause. So you've got both of those. It's a complex sentence. Again, how can you make these sentences active voice? Looking at the next slide, slide 24. If you have passive voice, too many lobsters have been ordered by the chef. You can just simply flip it and say, the chef ordered too many lobsters. Instead of saying, our quarterly sales numbers will be confirmed by the auditors will confirm our quarterly sales numbers. And then parallel structure. Parallel structure is one of those things that when you're writing, you want to make sure everything is kind of uniform and written in the same way. We'll look at some examples. We use the following food criteria for our restaurant evaluation: taste, variety, and how it was presented. So you could just say taste, variety, presentation. So it's all one word. Instead of saying Gwen will do the following, meet with Mark, after her meeting, give a presentation, she'll follow up with accounting. You can just say meet with Mark, give a presentation, follow up with accounting. So that everything starts with a verb. Parallel structure makes it kind of more pleasing in a rhythm, if that makes any sense, but it just kind of makes everything look uniform. The next slide, slide 26, looks at a before and after once you kind of implement parallel structure into the writing. So look at the agenda in the top left corner. Has different bullet points, right? But if you put the agenda with parallel structure, which is in the bottom right corner, you can see that everything's been written as a sentence and it all starts with what? It's just a more uniform look. And it's just very clean and a lot easier for the reader to follow when they see parallel structure. Moving on to paragraphs, the book points out and reiterates that a paragraph is a group of sentences that are formed together around a common theme. So that's what a paragraph is. You want to make sure that your paragraphs are logical. So unity, coherence, and length. Unity is when all parts work together to develop a single idea logically. You just want to make sure that they're all working together. All of the sentences are forming around the one common idea. There's not anything that stands out that's kind of like it doesn't belong. Coherence makes sure that the discussion is integrated. So it's not just you're having a paragraph about this, and then a paragraph about this, and a paragraph about this. But it's coherent, so there's a logical flow between the sentences and the paragraphs. And then paragraph lengths. You want to make sure that your paragraph lengths aren't so short so they just look very choppy, but they're also not long enough that your reader is going to get lost in the text. And then lastly, the last learning outcome is tone. So making sure that you keep in mind your tone does have an impact on an audience member. Think about when you are sending a text message or when you're typing an email. If you're in all caps, that tone automatically conveys what? That you're probably upset. And you're probably going to get a response that says, are you mad? Or what's bothering you? You haven't said anything, but in your tone there, just because it's in all caps, people are going to pick up on that. and that's how they'll react. So making sure that you keep your attitude in check when it comes to the reader and to the subject of the message. So how to convey an appropriate tone. Now we're looking at slide 31. Write confidently. So making sure that you have a confident tone, but you do not want to come off as arrogant, so keep that in mind. Second, make sure your tone is courteous and sincere. So extreme flattery should be checked. Over-exaggeration about anything should be checked. So just making sure that it comes off as sincere and genuine. Using appropriate emphasis and subordination. So making sure that your sentence structure and the position and the use and your verb voice all comes through with the subordination and the emphasis in the wordings that you have. Positive language. Talk about what you can do versus what you can't do. And then stress the you attitude. Emphasize what the receiver wants to know and how they're going to be affected. So make sure, again, you always keep the reader in mind when you're talking about the you attitude and the writing in general. So making sure that you sound confident. One more example. How can you make this sound more or less confident? If you'd like to set up an appointment, just ask. It's not the most confident, right? So just say, are you free July 29th? That way you're taking the initiative and you're not just sitting around waiting for someone to call, because they may not take that as they need to answer it. You want an answer, but they might not know that you're wanting an answer. Last one, I know that you'll like our new delivery schedule. Well, that's a little too much. So why don't you just say, our delivery schedule provides faster service and options. Simple enough, right? Instead of saying, I know you're going to like it. That's where the arrogance comes in. You don't know that they're going to like it. But tell them what's the benefit of it. It's going to have faster service and more options for you. Remember, keeping the reader or the customer in mind. So there you have it, Chapter 5, Revising Your Writing. If you have any questions, email me. Make sure you get the homework assignments completed. And I will see you guys soon. Have a good night. Bye-bye.